I arrived at my father's 60th birthday party expecting cake and celebration, not strangers with clipboards walking through my backyard. 3 people were measuring my guest house, the one I'd spent 2 years renovating with my own savings. Dad stood by the barbecue grill beaming as he announced to everyone within earshot that he'd just sold my property to fund my unemployed brother Danny's landscaping business. The real estate agent, a nervous woman named Sharon, thrust legal documents into my trembling hands while my phone buzzed relentlessly with a deed registration alert. My hands shook as I stared at the contract Sharon had given me. The papers showed a sale price of $85,000 for what was supposed to be my guest house. I looked up at my father, Robert, who was flipping hamburgers like nothing unusual was happening. "Dad, what is this? You can't sell my property," I said, my voice barely containing my shock. Robert wiped his hands on his apron and smiled that patronizing smile I remembered from childhood. "Marcy, honey, the guest house sits on my land. Technically, it's always been mine. Danny needs this money to start his business, and family helps family." I pulled out my phone and showed him the property deed I'd photographed years ago. "This legal document says I own the structure. I paid for every board, every nail, every coat of paint." Sharon shifted uncomfortably beside the patio table, her face growing pale as she examined my deed. The buyers, a middle-aged couple who introduced themselves as the Hendersons, stood awkwardly near my rose garden, clearly sensing the tension. "There seems to be some confusion about the ownership," Mrs. Henderson said diplomatically. "We've already made financial commitments based on this sale." Danny chose that moment to stumble through the back gate, clearly having spent his afternoon at the local bar. His construction boots left mud tracks across the stone pathway I'd installed last summer. "Hey sis, thanks for funding my new venture," he slurred, throwing his arm around my shoulders. "Dad says I'll have the money by next week. I've already ordered equipment and put deposits down on 3 commercial accounts." My heart pounded as I examined the sale contract more carefully. Something looked wrong with the signatures. I held the document up to the afternoon sunlight and felt my stomach drop. The signature claiming to be mine was a crude forgery, nothing like my actual handwriting. "Dad, this signature isn't mine. Someone forged my name on these papers." Robert's wife, Patricia, emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of corn on the cob. She'd been my stepmother for 15 years, and I'd always considered her fair-minded. But when she saw the documents, her face flushed with guilt. "Oh dear, I was hoping this wouldn't come up during the party," Patricia murmured. "Your father has been planning this for weeks. He said you'd understand once you saw how much Danny needed the help." The party guests, mostly neighbors and family friends, began gathering around our heated discussion. My childhood friend Jessica, who'd become a paralegal after law school, quietly pulled out her phone and started photographing the forged documents. "Marcy, you're being dramatic," Robert said, his voice taking on the stern tone he'd used when I was 16. "This is a family matter, and families stick together. Danny's been struggling since he lost his job, and this is his chance to build something meaningful." "By stealing from me," I shot back. "This isn't helping family, Dad. This is fraud." Sharon looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. The Hendersons whispered urgently to each other near the pool, probably reconsidering their decision to buy property with such obvious title problems. "Nobody's stealing anything," Robert insisted. "I'm making a business decision with my own property. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should find somewhere else to live." The threat hung in the air like smoke from the barbecue. 23 party guests had heard my own father essentially disown me over money. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Jessica stepped forward, her legal training evident in her composed demeanor. "Robert, these documents contain what appears to be forged signatures. That's a federal crime. Are you sure you want to proceed with this sale?" "Federal crime." Danny laughed, swaying slightly on his feet. "Come on, it's just family business. Marcy's always been selfish anyway. She makes good money at that marketing firm. She doesn't need rental income from some little pool house." That comment pushed me over the edge. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I need to report property fraud and identity theft." I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Robert's confident expression finally cracked. "Marcy, don't be ridiculous. You're ruining your brother's future over paperwork." "I'm protecting myself from theft," I replied, waiting for the operator to answer. "If you want to help Danny use your own money, don't forge my signature and steal my property." The party atmosphere completely evaporated. Neighbors began making excuses and heading toward their cars. The Hendersons looked absolutely horrified that they'd stumbled into a family crime scene. Sharon gathered her papers with shaking hands, clearly realizing her commission was about to disappear along with her professional reputation. Within an hour, my lawyer friend Michael arrived at what remained of the birthday party. Most guests had fled, leaving behind half-eaten plates of food and an atmosphere thick with family tension. Michael examined the forged documents with the careful attention of someone who'd seen similar cases before. "These signatures are obviously fake." He confirmed, holding the papers up to compare with samples of my real signature. "The pen pressure is wrong, the letter formations don't match, and the spacing is completely different." The Hendersons had retreated to their car to make phone calls, but I could see through the windshield that their conversation was growing heated. After 20 minutes, they returned with unexpected news that made my blood run cold. "We've already wired the full purchase price to an escrow account," Mr. Henderson announced grimly. "Our previous home sold yesterday, and we've committed to a closing date that can't be changed. Our attorney is driving over right now to sort this mess out." Patricia dropped into a patio chair, her face pale with realization. "Robert, what have you done? These people have already paid for something we don't have the right to sell." Danny sobered up quickly when the legal implications became clear. "Wait, you mean I might not get the business money? I've already signed contracts with suppliers and hired 2 employees." "That's the least of your problems," Michael said grimly. "Participating in property fraud carries serious criminal penalties, even for family members." 20 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the driveway and out stepped Douglas Wright, attorney for the Henderson family. He wore an expensive suit and carried a briefcase that suggested he handled high-stakes legal matters. His presence immediately shifted the power dynamics of our family dispute. "I represent the Henderson family in this property transaction," he announced, handing business cards to everyone present. "My clients have already invested considerable resources in this purchase, including liquidating their previous residence. We intend to hold all parties liable for any financial damages resulting from fraudulent documentation." Sharon burst into tears. "I need this commission to avoid foreclosure on my own home. My husband lost his job 6 months ago, and we're behind on 3 mortgage payments. I suspected something might be wrong with the paperwork, but I was desperate." Her confession sent shockwaves through our small group. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Even Danny looked sobered by the realization that multiple families could lose their homes over this scheme. "You knew the documents were fraudulent and proceeded anyway." Douglas Wright's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to courtroom battles. "That makes you an active participant in the conspiracy, not just a victim of deception." Michael pulled me aside for a private conversation near the garden shed. "Marcy, this situation is worse than I initially thought. If the Hendersons pursue civil damages and the district attorney files criminal charges, everyone involved could face serious consequences." "Even me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Victims of identity theft often get caught up in legal proceedings for months or years. Your property could remain tied up in court while everything gets sorted out. In the meantime, you might not be able to sell, refinance, or even make certain improvements." Back at the patio table, Douglas Wright was interviewing each person, methodically taking notes on their involvement in the fraudulent sale. His questions revealed disturbing details about how long this scheme had been developing. "Mr. Robert, when did you first decide to sell your daughter's property without her knowledge?" "It's not her property," Robert insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The guest house is on my land." "But you forged her signature on ownership transfer documents, correct? That suggests you knew she had legal claims to the structure." Patricia couldn't stay quiet any longer. He's been receiving money from someone for months, mystery payments that he claimed were from odd jobs, but he never actually worked anywhere. I found bank deposit slips hidden in his workshop. This revelation changed everything. Michael and Douglas Wright exchanged glances that suggested they both recognized the implications of ongoing financial arrangements. "Mrs. Patricia, can you provide documentation of these mysterious payments?" "I photographed the bank slips because I was worried Robert was hiding gambling debts again. He had problems with poker games about 5 years ago." Danny's face went white. "Dad, you said the money for my business was coming from selling Marcy's guest house. Where did those other payments come from?" Robert's silence spoke volumes. Jessica, still documenting everything with her phone, captured his guilty expression perfectly. Douglas Wright closed his briefcase with an ominous snap. "Based on what I've heard tonight, I believe we're looking at a conspiracy that extends beyond simple property fraud. I'll be filing civil suits against all involved parties, first thing Monday morning. My clients expect full financial compensation plus punitive damages." The sun was setting behind the oak trees in our backyard, casting long shadows across the scene of my family's destruction. 24 hours ago, I'd been planning to enjoy cake and celebrate another year of my father's life. Now I was facing potential financial ruin because of his greed and my brother's desperation. "Michael, what are my options?" "Fight back with everything you've got," he said quietly. "This isn't over and you're not powerless, but you need to be prepared for a long, difficult battle." As Douglas Wright handed me his business card, I realized that my real fight was just beginning. The peaceful life I'd built through years of hard work and careful saving was about to become a legal battlefield. Monday morning brought revelations that turned my property dispute into something much more sinister. Michael called me at 7 a.m. with news that made my coffee cup shake in my hands. Marcy, my investigator, found 3 other properties in the county with similar fraudulent sales involving Sharon's real estate company. This isn't just about your guest house anymore. I drove straight to Michael's law office where he'd spread documents across his conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Bank records, property deeds, and transaction histories painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning several months. "Look at this pattern," Michael said, pointing to highlighted sections of financial records. "Your father received payments of exactly $2,000 every month for the past 6 months. The money came from different accounts, but they all trace back to shell companies connected to Sharon's brokerage." My phone rang with a call from Jessica. "Marcy, you need to see the news. Channel 7 is running a story about property fraud in our area, and they mentioned your address specifically." The Henderson family had contacted local media after their attorney discovered the scope of Sharon's fraudulent activities. Their private investigator, a former police detective named Carl Rodriguez, had uncovered evidence of forged documents involving at least 12 properties across 3 counties. The scheme worked by targeting families with internal conflicts. Carl explained when he called me that afternoon. Someone would identify properties with unclear ownership situations, then forge documents to facilitate quick sales. The criminals split the proceeds with accomplices who provided inside information about vulnerable families. Danny's role became clearer when Patricia brought me a box of documents she'd found in Robert's workshop. Hidden beneath old tax returns were contracts showing Danny had signed agreements to perform landscaping work on properties that didn't legally belong to the people hiring him. "Your brother knew he was working for people who didn't own the properties they were hiring him to improve," Patricia said, her voice hollow with disappointment. "Robert paid him to stay quiet about the arrangements." The web of deception expanded when Amanda Torres, an investigative reporter from Channel 7, contacted me directly. She'd been tracking similar fraud cases across multiple states and believed our situation connected to a much larger criminal operation. "I've documented over 40 properties involved in this type of scheme," Amanda explained during our phone interview. The criminals target middle-class families with property disputes, elderly owners with confused heirs, and anyone with mortgages in default. They forge documents, complete fake sales, and disappear with the money before anyone realizes what happened. Douglas Wright called that evening with disturbing news about his client's situation. The Hendersons aren't just innocent buyers. My investigation revealed they've been involved in similar transactions in Arizona and Nevada. They're part of an investment group that specifically targets properties with title problems. This revelation completely changed my understanding of what had happened. Instead of being victims, the Hendersons were experienced participants in a property flipping scheme that exploited legal confusion to generate quick profits. They know exactly what they're doing, Douglas continued. The investment group identifies properties with questionable ownership, makes offers too good to refuse, then uses legal pressure to force through sales, even when the documentation is obviously fraudulent. Michael's face was grim when I shared this information. That means everyone involved in your case except you was working together from the beginning. Your father, your brother Sharon, and the supposed buyers were all part of the same criminal conspiracy. The mortgage company added another layer of complications when they contacted me Tuesday morning. A representative named Jennifer Walsh informed me that someone had been making unauthorized modifications to my property loan using forged documents. Miss Marcy, our records show applications for home equity loans totaling $75,000 against your primary residence. The signatures appear to be yours, but given recent fraud reports, we're freezing all accounts pending investigation. My financial life was unraveling rapidly. Credit monitoring alerts flooded my phone with notifications of new accounts opened in my name. Someone had used my stolen identity to apply for credit cards, personal loans, and even automotive financing. This goes way beyond property fraud, Jessica observed as we reviewed the growing pile of evidence. Someone has been systematically stealing your identity for months, possibly years. Every document they forged brings additional federal charges. The scope of the criminal activity became clear when Agent Tom Bradley from the Federal Bureau of Investigation contacted Michael's office. Apparently, Amanda Torres's news investigation had attracted federal attention due to the interstate nature of the fraud scheme. We've been tracking this criminal organization for 18 months, Agent Bradley explained during our preliminary interview. Your case provides crucial evidence linking local conspirators to a national property fraud network. The stolen identities and forged documents cross state lines, making this a federal matter. Robert's arrest became inevitable when bank records revealed he'd been receiving payments from the criminal network for over 2 years. The money hadn't started with my property sale, but had been flowing regularly in exchange for information about vulnerable properties in our neighborhood. Your father was essentially a talent scout for property fraud, Agent Bradley said bluntly. He identified targets, provided inside information about family situations, and helped criminals understand which properties could be stolen most easily. Danny's construction company records revealed he'd been performing work on dozens of properties without proper permits or legitimate ownership verification. His business was essentially a front operation for criminals who needed someone to make cosmetic improvements before fraudulent sales. The landscaping work created an appearance of legitimate property maintenance, Agent Bradley explained. When potential buyers saw recently improved properties, they were less likely to question ownership documentation. Patricia's cooperation became essential when investigators discovered she'd unknowingly signed documents that transferred portions of their own property to the criminal network. Her signatures had been forged on some papers, but others bore her genuine authorization based on Robert's lies about routine financial matters. I thought I was signing mortgage refinancing papers, she confessed tearfully. Robert told me we were consolidating debt and improving our interest rates. I never imagined he was stealing from his own daughter or participating in organized crime. The investigation revealed that Sharon's real estate license had expired 3 years ago, making every transaction she'd handled completely illegal. Her desperate financial situation had made her vulnerable to recruitment by criminals who promised easy money for facilitating fraudulent sales. Professional licensing boards flag expired credentials immediately, Agent Bradley noted. The fact that Sharon continued operating suggests she had inside help from someone with access to regulatory databases. By Thursday afternoon, the full extent of the conspiracy was becoming clear. My simple property dispute had uncovered a criminal network that had defrauded hundreds of property owners across multiple states. The stolen money totaled more than $3 million, with victims ranging from elderly retirees to young families struggling with mortgage payments. Your willingness to fight back triggered an investigation that will help dozens of other victims, Agent Bradley said. But I need to warn you that the legal process will be lengthy and complex. Federal cases involving this much money and this many defendants can take years to resolve. I realized that seeking justice for my stolen guest house had accidentally exposed me to a much larger battle against organized criminals. The choice was no longer about recovering one property, but about whether I had the courage to help prosecute a network that had destroyed countless families' financial security. Friday morning brought federal agents to what remained of my father's birthday party aftermath. Agent Tom Bradley arrived with Detective Lisa Morgan from the county sheriff's office and 2 additional investigators whose badges identified them as specialists in financial crimes and identity theft. The sight of official federal identification badges created an immediate shift in everyone's behavior. Sharon, who had been trying to salvage her remaining real estate deals, broke down completely when Agent Bradley displayed his credentials. "I never meant for this to get so complicated," she sobbed, collapsing into one of the patio chairs where we'd been celebrating just days before. "My husband needs surgery for his heart condition, and our insurance coverage is terrible. When they offered me $5,000 per transaction, it seemed like the answer to our prayers." Agent Bradley's expression remained professional but compassionate as he documented Sharon's confession. "Mrs. Sharon, the investigation shows your involvement in fraudulent property transfers across 3 states. We've identified 17 transactions bearing your forged professional credentials over the past 2 years. The scope of my identity theft was more devastating than anyone had initially realized. Financial forensics specialist Detective Sarah Chen presented evidence showing criminals had used my stolen personal information to establish an entire parallel financial identity. Miss Marcy, your social security number, birth certificate information, and employment history have been used to create false personas in California, Texas, and Florida. The criminals established bank accounts, applied for business licenses, and even filed tax returns using your identity." Robert's arrest became inevitable when Agent Bradley presented evidence of his participation in the criminal network. Bank records showed he'd received over $30,000 in payments for providing information about potential victims in our neighborhood and surrounding communities. "Your father's role was more significant than simple opportunism," Agent Bradley explained. He attended community meetings, church functions, and neighborhood associations to gather intelligence about families facing financial difficulties or property disputes. Danny's cooperation became essential when faced with charges of conspiracy fraud and racketeering. His construction records revealed work performed on over 60 properties that were subsequently sold through fraudulent transactions. "I thought I was just getting steady work from people who flipped houses," Danny confessed during his formal interview. "Dad told me these investors paid cash for properties and needed quick improvements to maximize resale values. I never questioned why the ownership documentation seemed inconsistent." The Henderson family's true role shocked everyone when Agent Bradley revealed they were sophisticated criminals with extensive experience in property fraud schemes. Douglas Wright, their supposed attorney, was actually a former lawyer who'd been disbarred in 2 states for similar criminal activities. "The Hendersons are what we call professional victims," Detective Morgan explained. "They pose as innocent buyers while actually coordinating complex fraud schemes. Wright provides legal cover and intimidation tactics to pressure real victims into accepting fraudulent transactions." Patricia's involuntary participation became clear when forensic accountants discovered her genuine signatures on documents that had been altered after she signed them. Her trust in Robert had made her an unwitting accomplice to crimes that could result in serious federal penalties. My stepmother signed legitimate mortgage documents that were subsequently modified to include property transfers she never authorized. I learned during my interview with Agent Bradley. The criminals used sophisticated document alteration techniques that would fool most people without forensic analysis. Amanda Torres's investigative journalism had attracted attention from federal prosecutors who specialized in organized financial crimes. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Johnson contacted me directly to discuss the possibility of pursuing federal racketeering charges against the entire criminal network. Your case provides evidence of an organized criminal enterprise that operated across state lines for the specific purpose of committing property fraud, Attorney Johnson explained. Under federal racketeering statutes, we can prosecute everyone involved, from leadership to low-level participants, as members of a criminal conspiracy. The mortgage company's investigation revealed even more disturbing information about the extent of identity theft in my case. Jennifer Walsh called with news that criminals had used my stolen identity to purchase properties in states I'd never visited. Miss Marcy, our national database shows mortgage applications bearing your identity information for properties in Phoenix, Dallas, and Orlando. The total value of these fraudulent mortgages exceeds $400,000. Jessica's paralegal research uncovered legal precedents that could help victims of similar crimes recover damages beyond their actual losses. Federal victim compensation programs provided restitution for identity theft, property fraud, and related financial crimes. The law allows victims of organized financial crimes to recover 3 times their actual damages, plus attorney fees and investigation costs, she explained. If we can prove the full extent of what they stole using your identity, your compensation could be substantial. Carl Rodriguez, the private investigator working for the Henderson family, switched sides when he realized his clients were criminals rather than victims. His evidence files contain documentation of similar fraud schemes involving hundreds of properties across the western United States. I've been unknowingly helping criminals for over a year, Carl admitted during his voluntary interview with federal agents. They hired me to investigate property titles and ownership disputes, but I now realize they were using my research to identify targets for fraud schemes. Agent Bradley's investigation team discovered that Sharon's real estate company was a front operation for the criminal network. The business license insurance policies and professional registrations were all fraudulent documents designed to create an appearance of legitimacy. Professional criminals often establish fake businesses to provide cover for their illegal activities, Detective Morgan explained. Sharon's company gave them access to property databases, legal forms, and professional credibility that made their fraud schemes more convincing. The federal investigation expanded rapidly as agents identified connections between my case and similar crimes in 12 different states. The criminal network had been operating for over 5 years, systematically targeting middle-class property owners with sophisticated identity theft and fraud schemes. This organization stole over $8 million from property owners nationwide. Agent Bradley revealed during our final interview session, "Your willingness to report the crime and cooperate with our investigation provided the breakthrough evidence we needed to prosecute the entire network." By Sunday evening, exactly 1 week after my father's disastrous birthday party, I realized that seeking justice for my stolen guest house had evolved into something much more significant. The choice was no longer about recovering my property, but about whether I had the courage to help federal prosecutors dismantle an organized crime network that had destroyed hundreds of families' financial security. The investigation phase was ending, but the real battle for justice was just beginning. Monday morning marked the beginning of my transformation from victim to warrior. Instead of waiting passively for the legal system to resolve my case, I decided to take control and fight back with every resource available to me. My first strategic move was hiring Rachel Kim, a forensic accountant who specialized in identity theft recovery and financial crime investigation. Her reputation for aggressive victim advocacy had caught my attention through Jessica's legal network connections. Miss Marcy, most identity theft victims accept minimal compensation and move on with their lives, Rachel explained during our initial consultation. But your case involves organized criminal activity with recoverable assets. We can fight for complete restitution plus punitive damages. Rachel's initial analysis revealed that criminals had used my stolen identity to accumulate substantial assets that could be seized through federal forfeiture proceedings. Bank accounts, real estate investments, and business equipment purchased with fraudulent loans were all subject to recovery. The criminals made a crucial mistake by using your identity to build legitimate businesses and purchase valuable properties, Rachel continued. Federal law allows victims to claim ownership of assets purchased with stolen identities, even when those assets have appreciated in value. Jessica's paralegal connections provided access to legal resources that individual victims rarely received. Pro bono attorneys from 3 different law firms volunteered their services after learning about the scope of the criminal conspiracy, in my case. High-profile federal cases attract attorneys who want to build reputations for fighting organized crime, Jessica explained. Your willingness to cooperate with federal prosecutors makes you an attractive client for lawyers who normally charge hundreds of dollars per hour. Amanda Torres's investigative journalism created unexpected opportunities for public advocacy and victim support. Her news series about property fraud had generated dozens of calls from other victims who shared similar experiences with the same criminal network. Your case has become a symbol of resistance against organized financial crime, Amanda told me during our follow-up interview. Other victims are finding the courage to report their cases because they see that fighting back can actually succeed. Federal prosecutors offered me a unique opportunity to participate in a victim impact program that could influence sentencing decisions for all defendants in the criminal conspiracy. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Johnson explained that my testimony could help secure maximum penalties for the organized crime network. Victim impact statements carry significant weight in federal sentencing hearings. Attorney Johnson said, "Your story demonstrates how organized criminals destroy not just financial security, but entire family relationships and community trust." The Henderson family's cooperation agreement provided me with unexpected allies in pursuing civil damages. Once they realized their criminal exposure, they agreed to provide evidence against the network leaders in exchange for reduced penalties. Professional criminals often cooperate with authorities when they face serious prison sentences, Agent Bradley explained. The Hendersons' insider knowledge of the fraud network will strengthen your civil lawsuits and help identify additional recoverable assets. Patricia's decision to testify against Robert marked a crucial turning point in our family's recovery from his criminal betrayal. Her willingness to provide evidence despite the personal cost demonstrated genuine remorse and commitment to making things right. I enabled Robert's criminal activities through willful blindness, Patricia confessed during her voluntary statement to federal agents. Helping Marcy recover what he stole is the only way I can begin to atone for the damage my husband caused to his own daughter. Danny's cooperation with federal investigators reduced his criminal exposure while providing valuable evidence about the network's operational methods. His construction company records documented the criminal's systematic approach to property improvement and fraudulent sales. I can identify dozens of properties where we performed work for people who didn't legitimately own them, Danny told investigators. The patterns were obvious once someone explained what to look for, but I was too focused on getting paid to ask the right questions. Douglas Wright's law firm faced serious liability for facilitating fraudulent transactions, creating leverage for negotiating substantial compensation payments. Their malpractice insurance coverage included funds specifically designated for victim restitution in cases involving attorney misconduct. Legal malpractice settlements often exceed the actual damages because insurance companies want to avoid lengthy trials, Michael explained. Wright's firm will likely offer significant compensation to resolve your claims quietly and avoid professional sanctions. The mortgage company's investigation uncovered additional evidence of document forgery that strengthened my federal case while creating opportunities for civil recovery. Their forensic analysis proved that sophisticated criminal techniques had been used to alter legitimate financial documents. Mortgage fraud involving document alteration carries enhanced federal penalties, Agent Bradley noted. The technical sophistication of the document forgery in your case suggests involvement by criminals with extensive experience in financial document manipulation. Rachel's forensic investigation revealed hidden bank accounts containing money that had been stolen using my identity. Federal asset forfeiture laws allowed immediate seizure of these accounts pending resolution of the criminal cases. We've identified over $200,000 in bank accounts established using your stolen identity, Rachel reported. Federal law presumes that money in accounts opened with fraudulent identification belongs to the identity theft victim rather than the criminals who deposited it. Agent Bradley's task force provided me with victim advocate services that help navigate the complex federal legal system while protecting my rights throughout the prosecution process. Specialized victim coordinators ensured that my interests were represented during plea negotiations and sentencing hearings. Federal victim advocacy programs provide resources that most crime victims never receive, the victim coordinator explained. Your cooperation with the investigation qualifies you for enhanced services, including counseling, legal assistance, and financial recovery support. Michael's legal strategy involved filing simultaneous civil lawsuits against all participants in the criminal conspiracy, while coordinating with federal prosecutors to maximize both criminal penalties and civil recovery. This aggressive approach sent a clear message that I intended to fight for complete justice. Comprehensive legal action serves multiple purposes, Michael explained. It maximizes your financial recovery, deters similar crimes against other victims, and demonstrates that organized criminals cannot operate without serious consequences. By Thursday afternoon, my transformation from victim to advocate was complete. Instead of passively accepting the destruction of my financial security, I had assembled a team of professionals dedicated to recovering everything the criminals had stolen while ensuring they faced maximum consequences for their crimes. The realization that I possessed both the evidence and the allies necessary to achieve complete victory filled me with determination I hadn't felt since the nightmare began. Justice was not only possible, but inevitable, and I was going to make sure every criminal involved paid the full price for their betrayal of my family's trust. 6 months after my father's catastrophic birthday party, the scales of justice had tipped dramatically in my favor. Federal prosecutors had built an ironclad case against the criminal network, and my legal team had positioned me to recover far more than anyone had initially thought possible. The victim compensation settlement offered by federal prosecutors exceeded my wildest expectations. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Johnson presented a restitution package that included not only recovery of my stolen property, but additional damages for the emotional distress and financial disruption caused by the criminal conspiracy. Miss Marcy federal victim compensation laws allow recovery of 3 times actual damages in cases involving organized crime, Attorney Johnson explained. Your total award will be approximately $350,000 plus ownership of properties purchased with your stolen identity. Rachel's forensic investigation had uncovered a treasure trove of assets that criminals had purchased using my fraudulent financial profiles. Properties in Arizona, Texas, and Florida, along with business equipment and investment accounts, were all subject to federal forfeiture proceedings that would transfer ownership to me. The criminal's biggest mistake was using your identity to build legitimate wealth, Rachel explained with satisfaction. Federal forfeiture laws allow identity theft victims to claim ownership of any assets purchased with their stolen information, regardless of how much those assets have appreciated in value. The final property valuations shocked everyone involved in the case. The 3 houses purchased with my stolen identity were worth a combined total of $625,000, making me the unexpected owner of a small real estate portfolio spanning multiple states. Your stolen identity was used to purchase properties in rapidly appreciating markets, Rachel continued. The criminals inadvertently created a real estate investment portfolio that you now own free and clear, since the fraudulent mortgages are void under federal law. Sharon's real estate license was permanently revoked by state regulators, and she faced 8 years in federal prison for her role in the criminal conspiracy. Her desperate financial situation had made her vulnerable to recruitment, but her willing participation in document forgery carried serious criminal penalties. Professional licensing fraud carries enhanced federal sentences because it undermines public trust in regulated industries, Agent Bradley explained. Sharon's case will serve as a deterrent to other professionals who might consider participating in organized crime schemes. Robert's plea agreement included full restitution payments and a 5-year federal prison sentence that reflected his leadership role in providing intelligence about potential victims to the criminal network. His cooperation with investigators reduced his sentence but could not eliminate the consequences of betraying his own daughter. Your father's betrayal was particularly egregious because he used family trust to facilitate crimes against you, Attorney Johnson noted. Federal sentencing guidelines impose enhanced penalties for crimes committed against family members, especially when the defendant held a position of trust. Danny's sentence reflected his cooperation with federal investigators and his willingness to provide evidence against other participants in the conspiracy. 2 years of probation with restitution payments would allow him to rebuild his life while making amends for his criminal participation. Your brother's genuine remorse and cooperation convinced federal prosecutors to recommend a lenient sentence, Michael explained. His testimony will be crucial in prosecuting other members of the criminal network who haven't yet been arrested. The Henderson family faced federal racketeering charges that could result in decades in prison for their leadership role in the property fraud network. Their sophisticated criminal operation had victimized hundreds of property owners across multiple states over several years. Professional criminals like the Hendersons rarely receive lenient treatment from federal prosecutors, Agent Bradley observed. Their extensive criminal history and leadership roles in the conspiracy make them prime candidates for maximum federal sentences. Patricia's cooperation with federal investigators protected her from criminal prosecution while allowing her to rebuild her life independently of Robert's criminal activities. The divorce settlement awarded her their marital home, free of the liens that Robert's crimes had created. Your stepmother's genuine cooperation and remorse convinced prosecutors that she was a victim rather than a willing participant, Attorney Johnson explained. Her testimony about Robert's deception and manipulation of family relationships was crucial in establishing the emotional damage caused by his crimes. Douglas Wright's law firm settled my malpractice claims for $250,000 rather than face professional sanctions and criminal liability for facilitating fraudulent property transactions. Their insurance company recognized the weakness of their position and agreed to substantial compensation. Legal malpractice insurance companies prefer quick settlements to lengthy trials that could result in even larger judgments, Michael noted with satisfaction. Wright's firm essentially purchased their way out of criminal liability by compensating you generously for their professional misconduct. Amanda Torres's investigative journalism earned recognition from federal prosecutors and victim advocacy organizations for helping expose the scope of organized property fraud in our region. Her series of articles became a model for other journalists investigating similar crimes. Investigative journalism plays a crucial role in exposing organized crime networks that operate below law enforcement's radar, Amanda explained during our final interview. Your willingness to share your story publicly helped other victims find the courage to report their own experiences with these criminals. Carl Rodriguez's decision to cooperate with federal investigators rather than continue working for criminals provided valuable intelligence about similar fraud networks operating in other regions. His private investigation files helped federal agents identify dozens of additional victims. Professional investigators have unique insights into criminal methodologies that can help law enforcement understand how these networks operate. Agent Bradley acknowledged, Carl's cooperation provided evidence that will help prosecute similar criminal organizations in other jurisdictions. The mortgage company's resolution of fraudulent loans opened with my stolen identity eliminated all liability while providing additional compensation for the credit damage and financial disruption caused by the identity theft. Their settlement included credit monitoring services and identity protection for 10 years. Financial institutions have legal obligations to verify customer identities before extending credit, Rachel explained. Their failure to detect sophisticated document forgery created liability that they resolved through substantial compensation payments. Agent Bradley's final case report documented the complete dismantling of a criminal network that had operated for over 5 years while victimizing hundreds of property owners nationwide. The investigation had recovered over $4 million in stolen assets while securing criminal convictions against 17 defendants. Your case provided the breakthrough evidence that allowed federal prosecutors to understand the full scope of this criminal organization. Agent Bradley said during our final meeting, the network's leadership faces decades in federal prison, and their criminal enterprise has been completely destroyed. By the anniversary of my father's birthday party, I had not only recovered my stolen guest house, but had become the owner of a substantial real estate portfolio worth over $1 million. The criminals' use of my identity to build wealth had backfired spectacularly, creating assets that federal law awarded to me as compensation for their crimes. The transformation from victim to victor was complete, but the most satisfying aspect was knowing that justice had been served while other victims received the help they needed to rebuild their lives after similar criminal betrayals. 1 year after the birthday party that changed everything, I stood in my beautifully renovated guest house, surrounded by people who had genuinely supported me through the most challenging period of my life. The space that had nearly been stolen from me had become a symbol of resilience, justice, and the power of refusing to accept victimization. The nonprofit organization I founded, Identity Recovery Advocates, had helped 43 victims of similar financial crimes navigate the complex legal process of reclaiming their stolen lives. Working with forensic accountants, federal prosecutors, and victim advocacy specialists, we had recovered over $2 million in stolen assets for families who had nearly given up hope. Every case teaches us something new about how criminals exploit family trust and financial confusion. I explained to a group of recent victims during our monthly support meeting. But every victory demonstrates that organized crime can be defeated when victims refuse to remain silent. Robert's letters from federal prison arrived every month, filled with genuine remorse and detailed accounts of his rehabilitation programs. The man who had betrayed his own daughter for money was working to understand the psychological factors that had led him to participate in organized crime. Marcy, I know apologies cannot undo the damage I caused to your life and our family. His latest letter read, but I want you to know that my counseling sessions have helped me understand how gambling addiction and financial desperation made me vulnerable to criminal recruitment. I am committed to making amends for the rest of my life. Danny had successfully rebuilt his landscaping business using legitimate methods and honest practices. His monthly restitution payments were always on time, and he had become an advocate for other small business owners who faced pressure to participate in questionable financial schemes. Working with criminals taught me the difference between easy money and honest success. Danny reflected during our quarterly family reconciliation meeting. Building a business through hard work and integrity takes longer, but the results belong to me rather than some criminal organization that could destroy everything overnight. Patricia had transformed her painful experience into a mission to help other spouses recognize the warning signs of financial crime within their families. Her support group for family members of white-collar criminals provided resources that helped people rebuild their lives after discovering their loved ones' illegal activities. I learned that trusting someone doesn't mean ignoring obvious red flags, Patricia shared during her victim impact testimony. Financial secrecy, unexplained income, and pressure to sign documents without reading them are warning signs that should never be ignored, even when they come from people we love. Jessica had completed law school and specialized in victim advocacy law, using her experience with my case to build expertise in financial crime recovery. Her legal practice focused exclusively on helping identity theft victims navigate the complex process of reclaiming their financial security. Your case taught me that the legal system can work for victims when they have knowledgeable advocates who understand both criminal prosecution and civil recovery procedures, Jessica explained. Most victims settle for minimal compensation because they don't realize how much they can actually recover through aggressive legal action. The Henderson family had received 15-year federal prison sentences for their leadership role in the criminal conspiracy. Their sophisticated fraud network had been completely dismantled with assets worth over $3 million forfeited to compensate victims across multiple states. Professional criminals often believe they're too sophisticated to face serious consequences, Agent Bradley observed during the final sentencing hearing, but federal racketeering laws are specifically designed to dismantle organized crime networks and ensure that crime leaders face penalties proportional to the scope of their criminal enterprises. Sharon had served her sentence and participated in rehabilitation programs that helped her understand how financial desperation had led to criminal choices. Her cooperation with ongoing investigations had helped identify other fraud networks operating in neighboring states. I never intended to destroy families or steal people's life savings, Sharon wrote in her victim impact statement. But my participation in document forgery and fraudulent sales caused immeasurable harm to innocent people. I am committed to spending the rest of my life making amends for my criminal choices. Amanda Torres had won National Journalism Awards for her investigative series on organized property fraud, and her reporting had inspired similar investigations in dozens of other markets. Her work had helped expose criminal networks that law enforcement had not previously identified. Investigative journalism serves as a crucial check on organized crime that operates below the radar of traditional law enforcement, Amanda explained during her award acceptance speech. Victims who find the courage to share their stories publicly provide information that helps protect entire communities from similar criminal exploitation. Rachel had established a forensic accounting practice that specialized in helping identity theft victims recover assets that criminals had purchased using stolen identities. Her aggressive recovery strategies had helped dozens of victims reclaim wealth that they never knew existed. Most identity theft victims accept minimal compensation because they don't understand the full scope of what criminals have stolen, Rachel explained during her presentation at a national victim advocacy conference. Comprehensive forensic investigation often reveals assets worth far more than the original theft, creating opportunities for substantial recovery. Michael had developed a legal practice focused on coordinating criminal prosecution with civil recovery in organized crime cases. His comprehensive approach had helped dozens of victims achieve both justice and financial restitution. Effective victim advocacy requires understanding both criminal law and civil recovery procedures, Michael observed during his presentation to the State Bar Association. Victims who work with attorneys experienced in both areas consistently achieve better outcomes than those who pursue criminal or civil remedies in isolation. The 3 properties I now owned in Arizona, Texas, and Florida had continued appreciating in value, creating a real estate portfolio worth over $800,000. The rental income provided financial security that allowed me to focus on victim advocacy work without worrying about my own economic stability. The criminal's decision to use my identity for real estate investment inadvertently created long-term wealth that supports my nonprofit work. I reflected during my keynote address at the National Identity Theft Victims Conference. Justice sometimes takes unexpected forms, but it always provides opportunities for positive transformation. Agent Bradley had received recognition from the Federal Bureau of Investigation for his work dismantling organized property fraud networks. His task force had identified and prosecuted similar criminal organizations in 12 different states, recovering over $15 million in stolen assets. Organized financial crime networks require sophisticated investigation techniques and extensive cooperation between federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. Agent Bradley explained during his presentation to law enforcement professionals. But cases like Marcy's demonstrate that these networks can be completely destroyed when victims cooperate with comprehensive investigations. The mortgage company had implemented new verification procedures designed to detect sophisticated document forgery and prevent identity theft in real estate transactions. Their settlement with me had included funding for identity theft prevention programs in our community. Financial institutions have both legal obligations and business incentives to prevent identity theft, their corporate compliance officer explained during a community education seminar. Effective fraud prevention protects both customers and financial institutions from the devastating consequences of organized crime. As I prepared to close my remarks at tonight's victim advocacy celebration, I reflected on the profound life lessons that had emerged from what initially seemed like a simple family betrayal. The guest house behind me had been restored to its original beauty, but more importantly, it had become a symbol of justice, resilience, and the power of refusing to accept victimization. The most important lesson I learned is that justice requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. I told the gathering of victim advocates, law enforcement officials, and fellow survivors. Criminals count on victims remaining silent and accepting minimal compensation. But when we refuse to be intimidated and demand complete justice, we discover that the legal system can work effectively to protect honest people from organized crime. The difference between trust and naivety became clear through this experience. Trust should be earned through consistent actions over time, while naivety accepts promises without verification. Family relationships require trust, but even family members must be held accountable when they violate that trust through criminal behavior. Real love sometimes requires tough choices that protect family members from the consequences of their own bad decisions. I continued. Enabling criminal behavior by remaining silent doesn't help anyone, including the criminals themselves. True compassion means holding people accountable while offering support for genuine rehabilitation. The power of community support became evident throughout this journey. Individual victims often feel powerless against organized crime, but communities that support victims and cooperate with law enforcement can effectively protect themselves from criminal exploitation. None of us can fight organized crime alone, I concluded. But when victims, law enforcement, legal professionals, and community members work together, we create a network of protection that's stronger than any criminal organization. Justice isn't just about punishment for criminals, it's about building communities where honest people can live without fear of exploitation. Have you or someone you know ever experienced betrayal by family members that seemed impossible to overcome? I'd love to hear your thoughts about finding the courage to fight back when the people closest to us violate our trust. Please share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with your own journey toward justice. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who refused to accept victimization and found the strength to fight for what was right. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from knowing that justice is possible, even in the most challenging family situations. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting all victims who find the courage to speak truth about financial crime and family betrayal. Remember that seeking justice isn't about revenge, it's about protecting yourself and others from people who would exploit trust for personal gain. May your own journey toward truth and accountability bring you the peace and security that every honest person deserves.